The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion follows the story of the champion of Cyrodiil, who after witnessing the assassination of Uriel VII and being freed from the Imperial City prison, goes on a quest to save all of Tamriel from a massive Daedric invasion and the plots of Mankar Camoran. But what if I told you that the game's story in its early drafts is going to be different? Very different. Heavily involving none other than Jagar Tharn. In the Elder Scrolls Arena, the very first Elder Scrolls game, Jagar Tharn betrays and impersonates Uriel VII by using the Staff of Chaos, which was then split into 8 pieces and scattered across Tamriel. The Eternal Champion collects the pieces of the Staff of Chaos over a period of 10 years and then uses it to defeat Tharn and save the Emperor. Long story short, Tharn is an evil dude that we need to defeat, stuff that we all know by now. But what isn't as well known is how later games in bits of lore, albeit very subtly, actually managed to expand upon Tharn's character, and foreshadow a future role that he was supposed to play later on. We can first find traces of this within the next game in this series, Daggerfall. This is something that most people might miss, but the game actually generates a backstory for your character based on the questions you answered during character creation, which you can see when you go to the history tab on your character sheet. All of them briefly mention Jagar Tharn and his plot in one way or another, but interestingly enough, a few of them mention things like hidden agents and loyal servants of his that are scattered throughout Tamriel, even after his death. This might not seem like much, but it's actually important to remember for later. Battlespire is where things really become expanded upon, as Jagar Tharn is actually deeply involved with the game's plot. The Battlespire was an extra-dimensional training ground for the Imperial Guard, the most elite soldiers in Tamriel, and was managed by 5 powerful battle mages. Usually, Imperial battle mages were selected from their ranks in the Battlespire. In order to eliminate any possible rivals for the position of battle mage and sources of future trouble, Tharn made a deal with none other than the Daedric prince Mehrunes Dagon. Dagon would be allowed to take control of the Battlespire in exchange for killing the 5 ruling battle mages within. The concept of a working relationship between Tharn and Dagon is actually established a few times throughout the game. The official game guide, the Battlespire Athenaeum, clarifies that the pocket dimension that Uriel VII was sent to was actually a plane of Oblivion that was owned by Mehrunes Dagon. Another example is a character named Saran Ondaga that appears within the game, being a retainer for Jagar Tharn, who mentions that Dagon was instrumental in Tharn's plot to impersonate the Emperor. But, more interestingly, he repeatedly mentions the ebb and flow of magicka, and that Dagon must be prepared for some kind of potentially cataclysmic event, the tides of the waters of Oblivion. A book of the same name that can be found within the game concludes with these cryptic lines: "But ever shall darkness contest the light, and great were the powers that breathed the void and laid waste upon one another, and no oath might bind them, so deep were they in envy and perfidy. For once the portals are opened, who shall shut them upon the rising tide?" Doesn't a lot of this sound familiar? An invasion from Oblivion? Mehrunes Dagon? And interestingly enough, Jagar Tharn seems to be caught up in the center of a lot of it. So now we get to the time of Redguard. The actual game doesn't have anything to do with Tharn, at least on the surface. There is a bit of digging that we can do with some out-of-game texts floating around. Let's first take a look at the character Dram, a dark elf assassin in the service of Tiber Septim. Not much information is ever given about him in-game, but if we take a look at his official character biography as seen on the old Redguard website, we can actually find some incredibly interesting stuff. Dram is apparently a former Morag Tong assassin, for now some reason serves the Empire. At the same time, he worships Sithis, the god of death, and, get this, is apparently known to reincarnate. He's listed to be 252 years old and on his 3rd current incarnation at the time of the game. Okay, that's cool and all, but what does that have to do with Tharn? Well, let me explain. On a few official Elder Scrolls forums, developers like Michael Kirkbride, Ted Peterson, Kurt Coleman, and others would make several roleplay posts where they brainstormed and teased bits of information about upcoming games. One series of them were called the Zal Ghostlight Letters, which were supposed to be an exchange of letters between 2 wizards from the Somerset Isles and Morrowind. One letter mentions how the Morag Tong was known to be able to create simulacrums of Dram, which were sent out for various purposes. A simulacrum is basically an image, representation, or copy of someone or something. Another series of roleplay posts from around the time of Redguard includes a letter exchange between an elder moth priest known as Nohept Dur Kamal and Talon Warhaft, whom you might remember to be the general of the Imperial Guard from Arena. Nohept writes that he found a particular passage among the papers of something known as Tharnatos, which talks in depth about the Morag Tong's connection to Sithis, and asks Warhaft if this would be helpful in his investigation of tracking down simulacra. Warhaft writes back that he has been attempting to investigate and link Tharnatos to the Morag Tong, but has been unable to do so, and has been working with the Blades in order to track down the other simulacrums. The word Tharnatos once again appears in another roleplay form about Master and Secunda, where an individual going by the name Tharnatos Ultimo leaves this cryptic message: "Flee while you can, and take your wisdom with you. Your era is ending. Nirn Reborn will have no room for your kind, and the smoke of your pyres will be sweet in the nostrils of all true heretics." Jagar Tharn is known to have connections with Sithis as well, as the book The Light and the Dark from Daggerfall claims that Tharn had wholly aligned himself with the Dark, which is another name for Sithis. So what's going on here? Basically, the developers seem to be developing and teasing a plot involving simulacrums of Jagar Tharn that had managed to persist through some kind of collaboration with the Morag Tong, the main clone being called Tharnatos Ultimo, who clearly has some kind of plan to bring about the destruction of the Empire, which would have been supported by the sleeper agents mentioned in Daggerfall. An interesting thing to note is that the word Tharnatos seems to be a play on Thanatos, who is a Greek god of death. By the time of Morrowind, the association between the Morag Tong and the concept of resurrection had been completely dropped and was never expanded upon, but the plot regarding Jagar Tharn's simulacrums is still being teased here and there. One of the Morag Tong quests in Morrowind leads us to tracking down the High Elf known as Carecalmo. Carecalmo was a servant of the Empire, until he was found to be a supporter of Jagar Tharn's plot and a member of the cult of Mehrunes Dagon, which was known to be aiding the Dark Brotherhood, the Morag Tong's rivals. The story was basically rewritten so that the Dark Brotherhood was assisting Tharn, not the Morag Tong. The simulacrum plot is also further expanded upon through the use of a few rumors that can be heard throughout the game. Here is one example. Uriel Septim is sick, and wizards say that his heir, Geldal Septim, and the younger Septims, Enmin and Ebel, are just doppelgangers placed in the household during Jagar Tharn's tenure as Imperial Battle Mage. They say the guard charged a mob demanding destruction of the false heirs. Lots of folks were killed. The concept of a Daedric invasion is also teased in the Tribunal expansion through Eno Romari, leader of the End of Times cult, who has these lines to say: "We realize that the end of the era will bring many changes. We believe that the gates of Oblivion will open, and the multitude of Daedra will roam this world freely. Some might tell you that this is a good thing, that we are descended from the Daedra and will be returned to the natural order of things. I know differently though. The coming age will be a time of great horror." Another out-of-game text written by Michael Kirkbride known as the Numantia Intercept followed, where a strange individual known as Nuhada contacts Okada and the members of the Elder Council and warns them about a conspiracy regarding the Towers of Nirn. Within it, Nuhada seems to imply that Tharnatos and his sleeper agents are still active and hiding within the ranks of the Empire. So, the Empire seems to be terrorized by sleeper agents of Tharn and the idea that clones of him could very well be alive. It appeared that they would soon launch a terrible plan that would overthrow the Empire, which would occur alongside a Daedric invasion of Nirn. It seemed that Oblivion would be a game about thwarting this invasion while battling against the return of Jagar Tharn and uncovering his agents within the Empire. But, even with all the setup, most of it never really materialized. Well, for the Jagar Tharn aspect of the story at least. Mehrunes Dagon and a Daedric invasion of Tamriel are obviously very prominent within the game, but it appears that most of the story ideas regarding Tharn were condensed and repurposed into the character of Mankar Cameron and his Mysterium Xarxes. Meanwhile, the relationship with the cult of Mehrunes Dagon and the Dark Brotherhood was retooled into the Mythic Dawn. So why did it end up being this way? We don't really know. The most likely answer is that it's an honestly pretty weird and complicated plot that wouldn't have made much sense if you didn't play the previous games or were already really deep into the lore. Bethesda probably decided to simplify things and make the game's story stand on its own in order to have broader general appeal. But there you have it, the original and pretty crazy early plot idea for the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Do you think that Bethesda should have gone with this plot, or is it for the best that they changed it up? Let me know down below. And with that, I'll see you all next time.